I rebuilt my parents' house from the studs up. Took me 2 years and $40,000 of my own money. When I brought up the deed, my brother said, "Bro, I have 3 kids. You live alone and play video games. Be realistic." Mom nodded. I laughed, walked to my truck, and came back with an itemized invoice for every hour and every nail. "My name's Nolan. I'm 32. And if you told me 3 years ago that I'd be handing my own mother a legally binding invoice for $40,000 and change, I would have laughed in your face and then probably apologized for laughing, because that's the kind of guy I used to be. The apologizing kind. The sure, I'll handle it kind. The kind of guy who shows up with a truck full of lumber on a Saturday morning while everyone else in the family sleeps in. But we'll get there. Let me back up and give you some context, because this story doesn't make sense without knowing my family. I grew up in a small town in eastern Tennessee, the kind of place where everybody knows your business before you do, and the nearest Target is 45 minutes away. My parents, Rick and Donna, had 2 boys. My older brother Connor is 35, married to his wife Paige, and they've got 3 kids under 7. Connor was always the golden child. Quarterback in high school, homecoming king, the guy who peaked at 17 but somehow never stopped getting credit for it. Don't get me wrong, Connor's not a bad person exactly. He's just been told his whole life that the sun rises and sets on his schedule, and at some point he started believing it. Then there's me, Nolan, the quiet one. The one who was good with his hands, which is parent code for not college material. I went to trade school, got my contractor's license at 23, and started doing renovation work. I'm not rich, but I do okay. I own my house, I've got a decent truck, and yeah, I play video games in my downtime. Sue me. Some people golf. Some people collect stamps. I like building things during the day and blowing things up in a virtual world at night. It's called balance. Now here's where this whole mess starts. About 3 years ago, my parents' house started falling apart. And I don't mean like, oh, the paint's chipping falling apart. I mean the foundation had cracks you could fit your thumb into. The roof was leaking in 4 places. The electrical was so outdated it was basically a fire hazard with curtains. And half the plumbing was original from when the house was built in 1971. The house was dying, and my parents couldn't afford to fix it. Dad had retired from the plant 2 years before. Mom was working part-time at a dentist's office, and their savings was what I'd generously describe as modest. They were looking at either selling the house for next to nothing or watching it crumble around them. Connor's solution? That sucks, Dad. Wish I could help, but Paige and I just redid our kitchen. That kitchen remodel, by the way, cost $65,000. Quartz countertops. A pot filler over the stove. A pot filler. For a woman who I have personally witnessed microwave a hot dog and call it dinner. But I digress. I should mention that Connor makes good money. He's a regional sales manager for a medical supply company, pulls in probably $120 a year, and Paige works part-time as a bookkeeper at her cousin's accounting firm. They're not struggling. They just have a very specific definition of family obligation that conveniently starts and ends at things that benefit Connor. My solution was different because my solution was always different. I sat down with my parents one Sunday after dinner and said, "Look, I can do this. I can rebuild the house. Not a cosmetic facelift, an actual gut renovation. New framing where it's rotted, new roof, new electrical, new plumbing, updated insulation, the works." I told them I'd do all the labor myself and just charge for materials, and I'd float the costs and we'd figure it out later. My dad got a little misty-eyed, which for Rick is basically a full emotional breakdown, and my mom hugged me and said I was her angel. And honestly, that felt good. I know that sounds pathetic, but when you've spent your whole life being the afterthought, the backup son, the one who gets a gift card for Christmas while your brother gets a watch, hearing your mom call you her angel hits different. So I threw myself into it. I'm talking nights after my regular jobs, full weekends, holidays. I took 2 weeks off work around Thanksgiving one year just to get the roof done before winter hit. Here's the thing about renovating a house from the studs up while also working full-time. It ages you. I lost 15 pounds that first year, not in a good way. My girlfriend at the time, Cassie, told me she felt like she was dating a ghost who occasionally showed up smelling like sawdust and asking if she'd seen his level. She wasn't wrong. I missed birthdays. I missed a buddy's wedding rehearsal dinner. I spent my 30th birthday on my parents' roof replacing flashing in the rain because the forecast said 3 more days of storms and I didn't want water getting into the new drywall I'd just hung. And through all of this, Connor did nothing. Literally nothing. He came by once, looked around, said looking good, bro, drank one of my beers, and left. His contribution to our parents' housing crisis was a single compliment and a stolen Coors Light. I asked him once if he could come by on a Saturday to help me carry drywall upstairs. Just carry it. Not hang it. Not tape it. Not mud it. Carry it up a flight of stairs. He said he couldn't because he'd promised the kids he'd take them to the zoo. The zoo, which, for the record, would still be there the following weekend. My back would not recover as easily. Meanwhile, Paige would post on social media about how important family is, usually from their newly renovated kitchen, standing next to that stupid pot filler. I kept a spreadsheet. I know, that sounds obsessive, but I'm a contractor, it's what I do. Every receipt, every trip to the hardware store, every hour I worked. I wasn't doing it because I planned to charge my parents. I was doing it because I'm organized, and because somewhere in the back of my mind, I think I knew I'd need proof of what this cost me. Not in money, but in life. 2 years of my life, 412 trips to the hardware store, 1,100 hours of labor, and $41,614 in materials. I could have put a down payment on a lake house with that money. Instead, I put it into my parents' house, because that's what family does. Or at least that's what I thought family meant. The house turned out beautiful. I'm not being humble here, it was genuinely stunning. New hardwood floors, a completely reframed second story, updated bathrooms, a kitchen that made Connor's pot filler palace look like a food court. My parents were thrilled. Dad shook my hand and held it for about 10 seconds longer than normal, which in Rick language is basically a Shakespearean love sonnet. Mom cried. The neighbors came by and couldn't believe it was the same house. A local real estate agent who drove past told my dad the property value had probably tripled. And that's when things started to shift. Because suddenly, this house wasn't just a house anymore. It was an asset. A real, tangible, valuable asset. And I started thinking about something I probably should have thought about before I swung the first hammer. My name wasn't on the deed. 2 years, $41,000, and more hours than I could count. And legally I had about as much claim to that house as the mailman. That thought kept me up at night, but I told myself it didn't matter. These were my parents. We'd work it out. We were family. I was about to learn exactly how much that word was worth. Now I want to be clear about something. I didn't renovate my parents' house as some kind of investment scheme. I didn't do it expecting to be put on the deed. I did it because the alternative was watching my parents live in a house that was literally falling down around them while my brother admired his quartz countertops from across town. But once the renovation was done and the dust settled, it seemed reasonable to at least have a conversation about it. I'd poured 2 years of my life and over $40,000 into a property I didn't own. Any rational person would want some kind of acknowledgement, some kind of arrangement, even just a verbal understanding that this would be factored in down the road. So about 3 months after the last coat of paint dried, I brought it up. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I'd come over to install a new mailbox because of course I was still doing little projects. Mom had made her famous chicken casserole, Dad was watching a game, and Connor and Paige had come over with the kids because apparently the newly beautiful house was now everyone's favorite place to hang out. Funny how that works. I waited until after dinner. The kids were in the living room watching some cartoon, and the 5 of us were sitting around the dining table I'd built by hand from reclaimed oak. I took a breath and said, "Hey, so I wanted to talk about something. Now that the house is done, I was thinking it might make sense to have my name added to the deed. Not as the sole owner or anything, just as a co-owner, given everything I put into it." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight to it. Like the air got heavier. My dad looked at my mom. My mom looked at her hands. Connor looked at me like I'd just asked if I could borrow his wife. Mom spoke first. "Well, honey, we were actually going to talk to you about that." And the way she said it, I knew. I knew in my gut that whatever was coming next was going to hurt. Because when your mother says, "We were going to talk to you about that," in a voice that sounds like she's about to explain why the family dog had to go live on a farm, you brace yourself. "Your father and I have been thinking about the future," she said. "About what happens to the house when we're gone. And we've decided that it makes the most sense to leave it to Connor and Paige." I sat there for a second, processing. "Leave it to Connor," I repeated. "He has 3 kids, Nolan. They need the space. You're single, you have your own house. Connor's family is growing. And this house has 4 bedrooms now. Thanks to you. She said that last part like it was a compliment, like I should be flattered that the house I rebuilt was so nice that they wanted to give it to someone else. I looked at Connor. He had this expression on his face that I can only describe as practiced sympathy, like he'd rehearsed looking apologetic in the bathroom mirror before coming over. "Bro, look," he said, leaning back in his chair like we were discussing fantasy football and not $40,000 of my money. "I get that you put in work, and we all appreciate it, seriously. But I have 3 kids. You live alone and play video games. Be realistic. Be realistic. 2 years of my life. 1,100 hours. $41,000. And his rebuttal was, "Be realistic." I looked at my mom, waiting for her to jump in, to say something like, "Now, Connor, that's not fair," or "Let's find a compromise." Instead, she nodded. She actually nodded at what Connor said, like he'd made a valid point. Like the guy who contributed nothing, who showed up once with a compliment and left with my beer, had somehow made the more compelling argument because he'd reproduced 3 times. My dad, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. He stared at the table, the one I'd built, and said nothing. Rick's signature move. When things get hard, Rick goes silent. It's like watching a computer enter sleep mode during a crisis. I don't remember exactly what I said next because my ears were ringing. I think I said something like, "So let me make sure I understand this. I spent 2 years and $40,000 rebuilding this house, and your plan is to give it to the guy who showed up once and stole a beer." Connor's face changed at that. "Stole a beer? Dude, it was 1 beer. Of all the things to take issue with, 1 beer. That was the hill he chose." Paige, who had been quiet up until this point, decided this was her moment to contribute. "Nolan, I think you're being really unfair. Connor works hard to provide for his family. Not everyone has the luxury of being single with no responsibilities. The luxury of being single. Like I was lounging on a yacht somewhere, instead of spending every free hour I had on my hands and knees installing their in-laws' bathroom tile." I stood up. I wasn't angry, or at least I wasn't showing it. I'd learned a long time ago that getting loud in my family just gave them an excuse to call me dramatic and dismiss whatever I was feeling. So I was calm. I was so calm it probably scared them. I said, "I need to think about this," and I walked out. Didn't slam the door. Didn't raise my voice. Just walked to my truck and sat there in the driveway for probably 20 minutes, staring at the house I'd rebuilt with my own hands. The house that was apparently too good for me to have any claim to. Cassie and I had broken up 4 months before this dinner, partly because the renovation had consumed my life and partly because she said I had a pattern of giving everything to people who gave nothing back, which, looking at it now, was probably the most insightful thing anyone had ever said to me. I sat in that truck alone and I thought about every Saturday I'd missed, every vacation I'd skipped, every dollar I'd spent. I thought about the time I fell off a ladder replacing a soffit and bruised 3 ribs, and went back to work the next day because the project had a timeline and nobody else was going to do it. I thought about Connor's pot filler and Paige's social media posts about family, and my mother nodding like a bobblehead when her eldest son dismissed 2 years of my life because I play video games. And something shifted in me. Not broke. Shifted. Like a bone that had been slightly out of place my whole life suddenly popped into alignment. I realized that I'd been operating under a set of rules that only I was following. I was playing a game where I was the only one keeping score, and everyone else had already decided the outcome. That night, I went home and I opened my spreadsheet. The one with every receipt, every hour, every nail. I'd kept it out of habit, out of professionalism. But now I was looking at it differently. This wasn't just a record of what I'd done. This was documentation. This was evidence. This was $41,614 in materials and 1,100 hours of skilled labor performed by a licensed contractor on a property he didn't own, without a written agreement, based on a verbal understanding that had apparently evaporated the moment the last nail was driven. I called my buddy Travis the next morning. Travis is a lawyer, not a flashy one, just a solid small-town attorney who handles real estate and contracts and the occasional DUI. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time. And then he said, "Nolan, you kept receipts for all of this?" I said, "Yeah, I kept receipts." He said, "Good, because you're sitting on one of the cleanest unjust enrichment claims I've ever heard of." I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I was about to learn. And my family was about to learn that the quiet son, the one who shows up and does the work and never asks for anything, had finally stopped playing by rules that only punished him for following them. The weeks after that dinner were rough. I'm not going to pretend I was some stoic action hero who immediately launched into revenge mode. I was hurt. Like, deeply, structurally hurt. The kind of hurt that makes you question not just your family but yourself. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about being taken advantage of by the people who are supposed to love you. You don't just feel angry at them. You feel stupid. You feel like you should have seen it coming, should have known better, should have been smarter. And that shame is almost worse than the betrayal itself. I pulled back from my parents almost completely. Didn't call, didn't come by. Mom texted me a few times, little things like, "Missed you at Sunday dinner," and "Hope you're doing well, sweetie." No acknowledgement of what happened. No apology. No, "Hey, maybe we should talk about the house situation again." Just pleasant little messages designed to act like everything was fine, like I was the one being weird for having feelings about being swindled out of 2 years of my life. Connor didn't reach out at all. 0 texts, 0 calls. Which honestly told me everything I needed to know about how much my brother valued our relationship independent of what I could do for him. When I was useful, I was family. When I had an opinion, I was invisible. I threw myself into work, which sounds like a cliche, but it's what I know how to do. My contracting business had taken a hit during the renovation because I'd been pouring so much time into my parents' house, so I spent those first few months rebuilding my client base. I took every job I could find, even small stuff I normally would have passed on. Bathroom remodels, deck builds, basement finishing. I was working 6 days a week, sometimes 7, and the money started stacking up. Travis and I had our first real sit-down about the legal situation in late March. He'd done some research and laid it out for me over coffee at the diner on Elm Street, the one with the waitress who calls everyone sugar, regardless of age or gender. He said I had a few options. The cleanest was an unjust enrichment claim, which basically means someone benefited from my work and money in a way that's unfair if they don't compensate me. The house had tripled in value. I had receipts for every dollar spent, and I had documented proof that I performed all the labor. Travis said that even in the friendliest interpretation, a court would likely find that my parents owed me restitution, and if we factored in fair market labor rates for a licensed contractor, the number would be a lot higher than $41,000. He also mentioned something called a mechanic's lien, which is basically a contractor's right to place a claim on a property they've improved if they haven't been paid. The timeline for filing was tight, but we were still within the window. "If you file this," Travis said, stirring his coffee like he was delivering a weather forecast and not potentially the most dramatic thing I'd ever done, "they can't sell the house, refinance it, or transfer the deed without settling with you first." I didn't file right away. I needed to sit with it. This was still my family, still the house I grew up in, still my parents. The idea of taking legal action against my own mother and father made me feel sick. But every time I wavered, I'd think about Connor leaning back in that chair saying, "Be realistic," and my mother nodding along, and the nausea would shift from guilt to something else entirely. While I was figuring out the legal stuff, something unexpected happened. I met someone. Her name was Claire, and she walked into my life the way good things tend to, when I wasn't looking for them and was covered in drywall dust. She was a physical therapist who'd just moved to town, and I met her at the hardware store of all places. She was trying to figure out which anchors she needed to mount a TV, and I helped her, and she asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. And I said yes, because apparently I can rebuild a house from the foundation up, but I cannot mount a television without developing a crush. Claire was different from anyone I'd dated. She was direct, she was funny, she didn't play games, and when I eventually told her the whole story about my parents' house, she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with the kind of focused intensity that made me realize she was already strategizing on my behalf. "So wait," she said, putting down her fork at dinner. "They're planning to give the house you rebuilt to the brother who did nothing, and their justification is that he has kids." I said, "Yeah, that's the summary." She said, "That's not a family decision, Nolan. That's theft with a Hallmark card attached." I think I fell in love with her somewhere around Hallmark card. Claire didn't tell me what to do, but she helped me see clearly. She'd ask questions that cut right to the core. Like, what would you tell a client who did $40,000 of work on someone's property without a contract? The answer, obviously, was I'd tell them to get a lawyer, which I'd already done. The disconnect was that I was holding myself to different rules because it was family, And Claire helped me see that family wasn't supposed to be the reason you got taken advantage of. It was supposed to be the reason you didn't. My business kept growing. I landed a contract with a local developer who was building a small subdivision, and suddenly I had consistent work for months. I hired a helper, a kid named Jake fresh out of trade school who reminded me of myself at that age, eager and slightly too willing to say yes to everything. I started teaching him the same way my mentor had taught me, and there was something healing about that, about passing down skills to someone who actually appreciated them. By summer, I was in the best financial shape of my life. I had money and savings, my business was booked out 3 months, I had a girlfriend who made me laugh every single day, and I'd finally stopped losing sleep over the dinner that changed everything. I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolved. There's a difference. Anger is reactive and messy. Resolution is calm and permanent. I'd made a decision, and the only thing left was the timing. Travis called me on a Thursday evening in August. "Hey," he said, "your parents just listed the house with a real estate agent." My stomach dropped, not because I was surprised, but because the timeline had just accelerated. They were going to sell the house I'd rebuilt and pocket the profit, and based on the conversation at that dinner, I had no doubt that Connor and Paige would be the primary beneficiaries. The listing price was $435,000. The house had been worth maybe $140,000 before I touched it. "Travis," I said, "file the lien." He said he'd have the paperwork ready by Friday. And then he asked me something I wasn't expecting. "Do you want to try talking to them one more time before this goes legal?" I thought about it for maybe 5 seconds. I thought about my mother nodding. I thought about Connor's chair lien. I thought about Paige calling my singleness a luxury. And I said, "No, but I do want to do something first. Before the lien hits, I want to show them the invoice. In person, at Sunday dinner. I want to sit at the table I built and hand them a number." Travis paused. "That's either very smart or very dramatic." I said it could be both. I spent the next week preparing the invoice. And when I say preparing, I don't mean I slapped some numbers on a piece of paper. I mean I created the most thorough, detailed, professionally formatted invoice that has ever been produced by a man fueled by betrayal and a surprisingly good spreadsheet. Every single item was listed. Every trip to the hardware store, every box of nails, every sheet of plywood, every roll of Romex wire, every PX fitting, every tube of caulk. Dates of purchase, store locations, item descriptions, unit costs. 412 line items for materials alone, totaling $41,614.37. But here's where it gets interesting. That number was just materials. I had deliberately not charged my parents for labor because I was their son and I loved them and I thought that's what family did. But Travis had pointed out something important. If this went to court, the labor value would be relevant regardless of whether I'd originally intended to charge for it. I was a licensed general contractor. My market rate was $65 an hour. I'd logged 1,112 hours of work on that house. That's $72,280 in labor at fair market rate. So the invoice had 2 sections. Section 1, materials, $41,614. Section 2, labor, $72,280. Grand total, $113,894.37. I printed it on my company letterhead, and I put it in a manila envelope, and I set it on the passenger seat of my truck. I told Claire what I was planning. She sat on the couch with her legs crossed, listened to the whole thing, and then said, "I have one question. Are you doing this because you want the money, or because you want them to understand what they did?" I thought about it and said, "Both, but mostly the second one." She nodded and said, "Good, then do it. But Nolan, whatever happens at that dinner, you walk out of there knowing your worth. You don't let them talk you down. Not again." I hadn't been to Sunday dinner in months, so when I called my mom on Wednesday and said I'd like to come by, she sounded thrilled. "Oh, wonderful. I'll make the chicken casserole. Should I set a place for Claire too?" The casual cheerfulness of it almost derailed me. Like nothing had happened. Like the last few months of silence were just a scheduling conflict, and not the result of her co-signing the dismissal of everything I'd done. But I stayed focused. I said it would just be me, and I asked if Connor and Paige would be there. She said of course, they come every week. Of course they do. Now that the house has heated floors and a kitchen that isn't a fire code violation, everyone wants to come to Sunday dinner. I called Travis on Thursday and told him to have the lien paperwork ready to file on Monday. He said it would be done. I asked him if presenting the invoice in person could somehow hurt the legal case, and he said no, as long as I didn't threaten anything or say something that could be construed as extortion. Just present it as a professional document and let them respond, he said. And Nolan, if they try to negotiate at the table, don't engage. You tell them to have their attorney contact me. Sunday came, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. I drove over with the envelope on the seat next to me and the windows down because it was one of those perfect late summer Tennessee evenings where the air smells like cut grass and possibility. I parked in the driveway, the same driveway I'd repaved with my own 2 hands, and I sat there for a minute. I looked at the house. New roof, new siding, new windows, new front door with the Craftsman-style glass insert that I'd driven 3 hours round trip to pick up because Mom had seen one she liked in a magazine. Every inch of that house had my fingerprints on it, literally and figuratively. Connor's SUV was already there. Paige's minivan was next to it. I grabbed the envelope and walked in. The house smelled like casserole and nostalgia. Mom hugged me like I'd just come back from war. Dad shook my hand with his usual firm, say-nothing grip. Connor was on the couch with his oldest kid, watching something on the TV I'd mounted on the wall I'd framed. Paige was in the kitchen, standing next to the island I'd built, scrolling through her phone. "Hey Nolan," she said without looking up. "Long time no see." Like I'd been away on a cruise and not actively avoiding the family that had gutted me. Dinner was awkward in the way that only family dinners can be, where everyone's pretending things are normal and the tension is hiding behind the mashed potatoes. Mom chatted about her co-workers at the dentist's office. Dad gave a weather report that lasted 4 minutes too long. Connor talked about his kids' soccer league like it was the Champions League. I ate. I nodded. I waited. After dinner, the kids went to the living room, and the 5 of us were back at the table. My table. The reclaimed oak one I'd spent 3 weekends sanding and finishing. I figured this was the moment. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I thought they'd be shaking, but they weren't. I reached down beside my chair, picked up the envelope, and set it on the table. "What's that?" Mom asked. "I heard you guys listed the house for sale," I said. I kept my voice even, conversational even, like I was discussing the weather just like Dad had. The temperature in the room dropped about 15 degrees. Connor and Paige exchanged a look. Mom's smile froze. Dad studied the table. "We were going to tell you," Mom said. "I'm sure you were," I said, and I wasn't even being sarcastic. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. It didn't matter anymore. Look, I've had some time to think about the conversation we had a few months ago. The one about the deed, about who gets the house, about being realistic. I looked at Connor when I said that last part. He shifted in his chair, and I realized that I made a mistake. I continued. I should have treated this like what it was from the beginning, which is a professional renovation performed by a licensed contractor. I did the work. I paid for the materials. And at the time, I didn't charge for any of it because you're my family. But since the house is being sold, and since it's been made clear to me that I won't have any ownership stake in the property I rebuilt, I think it's only fair to settle up. I slid the envelope across the table. Mom opened it slowly, like she was afraid something might jump out. She pulled out the invoice, unfolded it, and I watched her eyes skim down the page. Past the header with my company name and contractor's license number. Past the itemized list of materials. Past the labor hours and the per hour rate. All the way down to the bottom, where the total sat in bold, $113,894.37. Her face went white. Actually white, like the blood just left. She looked up at me, then at my dad, then back at the paper. Connor leaned over to look, and I watched the color drain from his face too. Paige craned her neck from across the table and said, "What is that?" "It's an invoice," I said, "for services rendered." The next 30 seconds were the loudest silence I've ever experienced. 5 adults sitting around a handmade table in a house that smelled like chicken casserole, staring at a piece of paper like it was a bomb with a visible timer. And in a way it was. Connor broke first. "You can't be serious." He said it the way people say things when they're hoping the other person will laugh and say, "Just kidding." I didn't laugh. "I'm completely serious," I said. "Every line item on that invoice is documented. I have receipts for every dollar of materials and a log of every hour worked. If you'd like, I can also provide photographs of the renovation at every stage, because I documented those too." Mom's hands were shaking. She set the invoice down on the table and pressed her palms flat against the wood, my wood, like she was trying to steady herself. Nolan, this is your family. You can't charge us for helping your own family. I wasn't charging you when I was helping, I said. I'm charging you now because you made it clear that my contribution doesn't count. Connor has 3 kids, remember? I play video games. Be realistic. Well, this is me being realistic, Mom. Realistically, I'm a licensed contractor who performed over $100,000 of work on a property I have no claim to, and that property is about to be sold for $435,000. So yeah, I'd like to be compensated. Connor's jaw was working like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite form. Finally, he said, "This is extortion." I looked at him calmly and said, "No, Connor. Extortion is threatening someone to get something you don't deserve. This is an invoice for work that was actually done. There's a difference. Ask your pot filler." Paige jumped in, her voice hitting that particular pitch that people use when they think volume equals validity. "You are tearing this family apart over money." "Over money, Nolan. Do you know how selfish that is?" And I swear, the irony of Paige, the woman who couldn't be bothered to bring over so much as a sandwich during 2 years of renovation, calling me selfish over money while sitting in a kitchen I built was so thick you could have spread it on toast. I didn't take the bait. I'm not tearing anything apart. The decision to exclude me from the deed and sell the house I rebuilt was the thing that tore this apart. I'm just responding to it. And for the record, Paige, the $65,000 kitchen you're sitting in right now was built while I was up on a ladder in the rain replacing this roof. So I'd maybe sit this one out. That shut her up. Connor put his hand on her arm, which I think was supposed to be supportive, but mostly looked like he was holding her back from lunging across the table. Dad finally spoke. "Son," just the one word, heavy and tired. I looked at him, and for the first time I could see that he knew. He knew this was wrong. He'd probably known the whole time, but didn't have the backbone to say it out loud in front of Mom, because Rick doesn't do conflict. Rick watches the game and lets things happen to him. "Son, there has to be another way." "There is," I said. "You can put my name on the deed. We can work out a fair ownership split based on the value I added. Or you can pay the invoice. Or, if none of that works, my attorney will be filing a mechanic's lien on the property Monday morning, which means you won't be able to sell the house until this is resolved." Those are the options. The word attorney hit the room like a brick through a window. Mom started crying. Not the performative tears she used when she wanted to guilt trip someone into doing the dishes, but actual, genuine tears. Part of me felt terrible. The rest of me remembered her nodding at Connor's dismissal like it was a reasonable position, and the terrible feeling got smaller. Connor stood up. "This is ridiculous. Dad, tell him this is ridiculous." But Dad didn't say anything. He just sat there, looking at the invoice, and I think he was adding up numbers in his head, not the ones on the paper, but the ones that represented every time I'd shown up and every time Connor hadn't. I stood up too. "I'm going to go. I've said what I needed to say. If you want to discuss this, have your attorney call mine. His name and number are on the invoice." I'd had Travis add his contact information at the bottom, which in retrospect was a pretty boss move for a small-town lawyer. I walked out, got in my truck, drove home. Claire was on my couch reading a book when I came in, and she looked up and said, "How'd it go?" I said, "I think Paige might put a hit out on me." Claire smiled and said, "I'll handle Paige." The lien was filed Monday morning. By Wednesday, my parents' real estate agent called to say there was a problem with the title and the sale couldn't proceed. Mom called me in hysterics. I didn't answer. She called again. I texted back, "Please direct all communication through Travis." Hardest text I've ever sent. Here's what happened over the next 3 weeks. Connor and Paige hired a lawyer. Their lawyer called Travis. Travis presented the documentation, all 412 receipts, the labor log, photographs, the whole package. Their lawyer called back 2 days later and said his clients would like to settle. Turns out, when you show a lawyer 1,100 hours of documented work and $41,000 in receipts, the legal math gets real simple real fast. The settlement was this. I was added to the deed as a co-owner with a 30% equity stake, reflecting the value I'd added to the property. When the house sold, I would receive my percentage of the proceeds before any remaining distribution. The sale went through 6 weeks later at $420,000. My 30% came to $126,000. After Travis's fees, I walked away with just over $115,000. Connor and Paige got their share, which was less than they'd been counting on. Mom and Dad used their portion to buy a smaller place, a nice little ranch-style house that didn't need any renovation. Connor didn't speak to me for about 4 months after the settlement. Mom took almost as long. Dad was the first one to reach out. He called me on a Sunday evening, which is basically Dad's version of a grand romantic gesture, and said, "I should have spoken up at that dinner. I knew it wasn't right. I'm sorry, son." And I could tell he meant it, because Rick doesn't say things he doesn't mean. He just usually doesn't say things at all. Mom came around eventually. She said she'd been so focused on Connor's kids that she'd forgotten to see what was right in front of her, a son who'd given up 2 years of his life without being asked twice. She said she was ashamed. I told her I appreciated that, and I meant it, but I also told her things were going to be different going forward. I wasn't going to be the family utility company anymore. She said she understood. Connor finally texted me around the holidays. It was a long message, surprisingly thoughtful for a guy whose greatest contribution to the renovation was a stolen beer and a chair lean. He said he'd been thinking about how he'd treated me, not just with the house, but growing up. He said his kids asked about Uncle Nolan, and he didn't know what to tell them. I read it twice, then called him. We talked for an hour. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't a movie moment, but it was honest. And that's more than we'd ever had. Where am I now? I'm good. Better than good, actually. My business is thriving. I've got a crew of 4 guys now, including Jake, who turned out to be an excellent framer. Claire and I moved in together in the spring, and she's already talking about redoing the bathroom, which makes me laugh because apparently my life is just an endless loop of renovations. But at least this time, my name's on the deed. I'm sitting here typing this out while Claire makes dinner and complains about the cabinet hardware, and I'm thinking about what I learned. I learned that being kind doesn't mean being unlimited. I learned that family isn't a free pass to take what isn't earned. I learned that a spreadsheet, properly maintained, is a weapon of mass accountability. And I learned that the quiet son, the one who shows up and does the work and never asks for credit, isn't weak. He's just been waiting for the right moment to hand you the bill. Thanks for reading. And if any of you are about to renovate a family member's house out of the goodness of your heart, do me a favor. Keep your receipts.